Okay, so let's kick things off. What if I told you that maybe everything you thought you knew about Neanderthals, particularly how they got around, might be off?
Hmm.
Forget that image of like slow, lumbering figures who just stuck close to home.
Right, the classic stereotype.
Exactly. Imagine instead, capable, dynamic travelers, people covering thousands of miles and doing it surprisingly quickly, navigating continents, basically.
It's definitely a picture that's harder to square with those old stereotypes, absolutely.
Yeah.
For decades, our view of Neanderthal mobility was maybe, well, a bit limited by the physical evidence we could actually find and how we read it.
For sure. And that surprising, more dynamic picture is exactly what we're diving into today. We're tackling this long-standing mystery in paleoanthropology.
How did Neanderthals, our ancient cousins, manage these huge journeys across Europe, Asia, massive distances? We know they ended up really far from their sort of European heartland, like all the way out in the Altai Mountains in Siberia.
That's right. A huge trek. And this migration, it happens sometime between, 120,000 and 60,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But the big questions have always been, how? How did they get there? What routes did they take?
Yeah.
And maybe the most interesting part, how fast did they move? And that last bit has been incredibly tough to figure out, just looking at bones and tools.
Precisely. I mean, the archaeological record, it's naturally patchy, isn't it? You find sites, maybe some tools, bits of old camps, sometimes a bone if you're lucky, but they're scattered across huge areas and vast stretches of time.
Right.
So connecting those dots, trying to draw a clear migration path, especially over thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years, well, it's really, really challenging. You got massive gaps where evidence just isn't there.
Why is that? Is it just lost?
Could be it hasn't been found yet, or maybe it eroded away or got buried deep down over millennia. So you end up with these huge blank spots on the map.
Okay, so when you have a puzzle like that, with all these missing pieces in the physical evidence, what do you do?
Well, there's this really fascinating new analysis just came out in the journal PLOS1. And it takes a totally different tack. This research, led by Emily Coco and Radu Ayurveda, it uses cutting-edge computer simulations to try and fill in those blanks.
A computational approach.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack what they found, get our heads around this innovative method they used, and explore what it tells us about, the potential routes and maybe the surprising speed of these ancient Neanderthal journeys. It really offers a fresh look.
It definitely shifts the focus from just looking at static points on a map to trying to understand the process of movement itself, using data to simulate, the actual decisions a migrating group might have made.
Okay, let's unpack that core mystery first, though. You mentioned we know they migrated from Eastern Europe way out to Central and Eastern Eurasia, specifically the Altai Mountains in Siberia. That distance is just enormous.
It really is. Hard to overstate. Think, halfway across a continent, we know they got there. But why has just figuring out the path they took been such a persistent challenge for archaeologists?
Well, imagine you're trying to follow someone's footsteps across Europe and Asia, right?
Okay.
Those steps were made 100,000 years ago. And most of them have just vanished, swept away by weather, rivers changing course, buried under layers and layers of dirt over time.
So you find clues, but not the whole trail.
Exactly. We find their campsites, maybe places they stopped for a bit, left some tools behind. But these are few and far between along a potential route that's thousands of miles long. And different environments preserve things differently, too. So while we might have good evidence at the start in Europe and at the end in Siberia, mapping the precise steps in between. It's like looking for a few scattered breadcrumbs across an entire mountain range.
Wow, yeah.
It's not impossible, but it's incredibly slow work. And it leaves so much room for just guessing what happened in those huge gaps.
That scattered breadcrumbs analogy.
Yeah, that really hits home for the limitations here. So, okay, if the physical evidence is so sparse in those crucial connecting areas, how did this new study get around that? What was this computational method?
Right. This is where they brought in the heavy machinery, so to speak, large-scale computer simulation. They use something called agent-based models, which is pretty sophisticated.
Agent-based models. What does that mean exactly?
Think of it like building a really complex virtual world inside a supercomputer. They actually use the NYU Green Supercomputer Cluster for this.
Okay.
And in this virtual world, they created simulated agents, basically, representing Neanderthal groups. And they set rules for how these agents would move and make decisions based on the virtual environment they encounter.
So it's not just drawing lines on a map randomly. These virtual Neanderthals are actually reacting to the landscape, like a really complex, data-driven video game simulation of ancient migration. That's actually a pretty good way to think about it. And the rules for how the agents moved weren't random at all. The researchers fed the model tons of detailed information about the ancient world during those potential migration times.
Like what kind of information?
Things like terrain elevation, reconstructions of what ancient rivers and waterways looked like back then, where big obstacles like glaciers would have been.
Okay.
And, really importantly, detailed data about temperature and climate conditions during specific past periods. The agents would then decide where to go based on things like finding the easiest routes, avoiding big barriers, maybe trying to stick to slightly warmer areas.
Okay, that's crucial. It simulates choices based on, like, environmental reality. And you mentioned this type of simulation, modeling individual movement. It's common for studying modern humans or animals, but it hasn't really been used for Neanderthals like this before.
Exactly. Agent-based modeling gets used a lot in ecology, or studying how cities grow, even how diseases spread. Understanding how lots of individual actions create bigger patterns.
Yeah.
But applying it to ancient hominins, especially over these huge continental scales, that's relatively new. The study authors point this out. They think it's the first time this kind of detailed, environmentally driven agent-based modeling has been used to look at Neanderthal migration pathways over such vast distances.
So they're taking a tool used for modern complex systems and pointing it way back into the past.
Pretty much. To generate plausible scenarios where the physical evidence is thin.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. They set up this detailed virtual ancient world, let their simulated Neanderthal agents loose. What happened? What did the simulation actually reveal about how Neanderthals might have traveled?
Well, the headline finding, the one that really jumps out, is about the potential speed of the migration. The simulations show that Neanderthals could have made it to the Altai Mountains in Siberia from Eastern Europe surprisingly quickly. Much faster, perhaps, than our old mental image might allow.
Okay, define surprisingly quickly. We're talking thousands of miles ancient terrain. What does that translate to?
The simulation suggests they could have covered roughly 2,000 miles. That's about 3,250 kilometers.
Yeah.
In less than 2,000 years.
Wait, hold on. Less than 2,000 years to travel over 3,000 kilometers across Eurasia back then.
That's what the models indicate is possible under the right conditions.
That's incredibly fast in anthropological time. For a prehistoric group without, horses or roads or anything, that doesn't sound like just aimless wandering. That suggests pretty consistent, maybe even purposeful movement.
It absolutely does. It hints at a level of mobility, maybe even logistical thinking that we might not have easily given them credit for before.
Yeah.
It really challenges that old image of them being, slow and stuck in their ways.
Totally. And did the simulations point to when this fast travel was most likely?
Yes, they did. The models highlighted two specific ancient periods when climate conditions were generally warmer and more favorable. These seem to have been the best windows for this kind of long-distance travel.
Which periods were those?
One was called Marine Isotope Stage 5e, which was around 125,000 years ago. The other was Marine Isotope Stage 3, roughly 60,000 years ago.
So these warmer spells basically opened up the landscape, made it easier to travel, maybe more resources along the way?
Exactly. The simulations suggested that trying to make these huge treks during the really harsh, cold, glacial periods would have been much, much harder, maybe impossible, or just far less likely to succeed. The warmer intervals offered easier terrain, milder weather.
Makes sense.
And the model didn't just say when they could travel fast, it also gave clues about how they might have done it and where they might have gone.
Okay, so where did the simulation suggest they went? Did specific routes pop out?
They did. One really key finding was that the simulated Neanderthal agents tended to stick to river valleys. A lot.
River valleys?
Yeah, the researchers actually described them as acting like natural highways.
Ah!
Instead of trying to slog directly over mountain ranges or push through really dense forests, the simulated migrations often follow the paths of ancient rivers. These tend to offer, gentler slopes and more open country.
Right, easier walking.
Easier walking. And while the simulations explored various starting points and generated, a whole network of possible routes, they mostly converged on a kind of basic northern path, generally weaving through the area around the Ural Mountains and then into southern Siberia.
Using rivers as guide rails through a complex landscape, that feels intuitive, actually. Easier terrain, plus maybe water sources, food sources along the way.
It makes a lot of practical sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. And did these simulated routes, the ones following the rivers, did they match up at all with that scattered archaeological evidence we talked about earlier, those breadcrumbs?
Well, that's one of the really neat parts of the study, how they checked their work, basically. The researchers compared the paths generated by their computer models with the locations of known archaeological sites, sites attributed to Neanderthals or related groups from roughly the same time periods in those huge areas in between Europe and Siberia.
Was there overlap?
They found that, yes, these simulated routes frequently intersect with or pass very close to those known sites.
Wow.
It's not like absolute proof, of course, but it definitely adds weight to the simulation results. It makes them seem much more plausible. It's kind of like the model predicted where some of the breadcrumbs should be, and lo and behold, a bunch of them were found right along those predicted lines.
So the simulation wasn't just guessing, it was reflecting some underlying reality of where people could and did travel.
It increases the confidence, yeah, that their simulated natural highways likely correspond, at least somewhat, to routes that ancient people actually used.
That's a really powerful connection between the, abstract world of computers and the actual stuff found in the ground, using one to shed light on the other. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Connect this to the bigger picture. What do these findings, the surprising speed, these potential river routes, what does it all mean for how we understand Neanderthals and, well, the whole story of ancient humans?
I think what's really fascinating is how this research gives us crucial insights into these massive ancient migrations that are just notoriously hard to study with archaeology alone, precisely because of those gaps we keep mentioning.
Right.
It really highlights the huge potential of mixing these cutting-edge computational methods, like agent-based models, with the traditional fieldwork, using them together to unlock new secrets about our deep past.
So these computer simulations are not just like academic what-ifs. They can actually create testable ideas, plausible scenarios for things that happened tens of thousands of years ago that we otherwise just couldn't piece together.
Exactly right. They let us model really complex systems, like, say, a group of hominins trying to navigate an ancient environment and explore the range of possible outcomes based on the data we do have. This study gives us a compelling data-driven scenario for a major Neanderthal movement that's been debated and speculated about for ages. It puts some hypothetical meat on the bones of that sparse archaeological record.
And thinking about those routes again, the ones going through the Urals and into southern Siberia, you mentioned earlier, weren't there other ancient human groups around there at the same time? Other hominins?
Yes.
That immediately makes you think about interaction, right?
Absolutely. And this is maybe one of the most exciting implications of the whole study. Yes, the simulated migration routes would have taken these Neanderthal groups right through areas that we know were inhabited by Denisovans.
The Denisovans, our other really mysterious ancient cousins, mostly known from DNA, right?
Exactly. Known primarily from genetic evidence found in a few fossils from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains.
Oh.
Ironically, very near where these Neanderthal migrations were headed.
Yeah.
And this finding from the simulation fits perfectly with the genetic evidence we already had. We know from analyzing ancient DNA, and even DNA in modern humans, especially people in Asia and Oceania, that Neanderthals and Denisovans met and interbred.
Right, their genetic legacy is still around.
It is. So the study provides a really plausible geographical and time-based framework, a potential where and when for how and where those interbreeding events might have actually happened. It gives us a potential map for their encounters.
So this wasn't just a story about Neanderthals moving from A to B across a vast empty space. This rapid migration potentially brought them face to face with another distinct group of ancient humans, the Denisovans, leading to the mixing that geneticists have already detected.
It strongly supports that idea. The study reinforces the notion that this kind of rapid long-distance travel wasn't just theoretically possible for Neanderthals, but maybe, given the right environmental conditions during those warmer periods, it was almost an inevitable outcome of their ability to move and adapt.
Like it was bound to happen.
In a way, yes. And that mobility, in turn, likely set the stage for these really crucial interactions between different human groups. It lines up beautifully with what the genetic data was already hinting at regarding pretty fast dispersal rates for ancient populations.
It really paints a much more dynamic, connected, capable picture of Neanderthal life, doesn't it? Compared to that old static, isolated image.
Absolutely. They were explorers, they were navigators, they were interactors.
It just underscores how much we're still learning about our ancient relatives and maybe how sophisticated their adaptations and behaviors really were.
Definitely. We're constantly having to revise our assumptions.
Okay, so if we had to boil it down, summarize the main takeaway from this really cool deep dive. It sounds like Neanderthals were probably far more adaptable, much more capable of rapid long-distance travel than we maybe give them credit for. Effectively using things like river valleys as natural highways, especially during warmer climate windows, to make these incredible journeys thousands of miles across continents.
That sums it up well.
And crucially, these journeys likely brought them into contact with other ancient humans, like the Denisovans, leading to interactions we see echoes of today.
Exactly. They clearly weren't as confined by distance or big geographical barriers as older ideas might have suggested. Their world was likely much bigger, much more interconnected than we once thought.
And the study used these really advanced computer models to help fill in the blanks where the archaeological evidence is thin, unlocking this whole new layer of understanding about ancient migrations. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other mysteries about our deep history, about humans and our cousins, could we unlock if we cleverly combine traditional science with this kind of cutting-edge simulation?
It opens up a lot of possibilities for future research, for sure.
What else is hiding in the data, just waiting for a new way of looking at it? Definitely something to think about. So after hearing all this, what surprised you the most about how Neanderthals might have traveled? Did you picture them moving that fast? Or using rivers like highways? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know down in the comments below.
Yeah, please do.
And hey, if you found this deep dive into Neanderthal journeys fascinating and you want to explore more incredible insights from the cutting edge of science and history, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more explorations into the world of knowledge coming up.